Recently this week, I was chatting to a member of our church family, and we were chatting about the Ebenezer stone. And she said to me, that would be a great topic for one of your video blogs. So here it is. Now, an Ebenezer stone. Some of you might be wondering, what on earth is that? Well, the literal meaning of the Hebrew word that we find in 1 Samuel is stone of help. And in fact, Ebenezer is only mentioned 3 times in the whole of the Bible. And all 3 of these references are found in the book of 1 Samuel. And the first thing to say about Ebenezer is that Ebenezer was actually a place, and it was first and foremost a place of defeat. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, we find a story of the Israelites being defeated by the Philistines. Now, at that time, Israel had turned their backs on God. Idolatry was rife, and the word of the Lord was rare. In other words, the people had turned their backs on God, and they were distant from him. And it's in this context, the context of their idolatry, the context of their turning away from God, that 2 things happen. The first is that God calls Samuel. At first, he doesn't recognize the voice of the Lord, thinking instead that it was Eli the priest. But God has got big plans for Samuel. He's calling him to lead his people, calling them to lead them back to faithfulness to God. And the second thing that we see is that at Ebenezer, the Israelites go out to fight their enemies, the enemies who, of that time, of course, were the Philistines. And in 1 Samuel 4, verse 1, we're told that the Philistines camped at Aphek, and the Israelites camped at Ebenezer. There's a battle, the Israelites are routed, but worse than that, the Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark which was symbolic of God's presence and God's promises to his people. In other words, this is a catastrophic turn of events. This is hugely damaging in every way to God's people. But, and there's always a but with God, but God isn't finished. God isn't done yet. And Ebenezer, which was a place of defeat, becomes a place of victory. Defeat at Ebenezer is quickly turned into a place of victory. Eli the priest dies when he hears the news of the defeat. And God at that time then raises up Samuel to lead the people. And then we see at the start of 1 Samuel chapter 7 that thanks to the ministry of Samuel, the Israelites turn back to God. Samuel encourages the people to get rid of their idols, to get rid of anything and everything else that they are trusting in, and to put their trust totally and firmly in God. And he says that if they put their trust in God, if they put their trust in him and only him, then they can be assured of the victory. And so the people gather before the Lord. They fast and they pray as they come back and they turn back to God. But because they've all gathered together, the Philistines think that this means trouble. So they attack the people. And it's then that God miraculously intervenes. It's then that the Philistines are defeated. And it's then, in 1 Samuel 7 verse 12, that we read, "Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen. He named it Ebenezer, saying, 'Thus far has the Lord helped us.'" So what then is the meaning for Ebenezer for us today? And at the risk of turning this into a sermon, I do actually have 3 points. And the first thing is, thus far has the Lord helped us. In times when we're tempted to doubt, or times when we're struggling, it's good to remind ourselves, isn't it, of all that God has done for us. We need to remind ourselves, thus far has the Lord helped us, by reminding ourselves of God's goodness and his faithfulness that we've experienced in the past. And remembering, thus far has the Lord helped us, helps us to trust him for the future too. But then the second thing is that some of us today need to raise an Ebenezer. The Ebenezer stone was a way to remind future generations of the goodness and faithfulness of God, of the power of God to act, and of God's victory. Some of us need to raise an Ebenezer stone in our own lives. We need to remind ourselves of the times when we've seen God's victory in our own lives, but we also need to pass on the memory of those victories to the next generation. We need to be sharing those testimonies of God's goodness and his faithfulness to our children and also to our children's children. And I think that this is one of the amazing roles of grandparents in our church family and in our society today. Because as we do that, we can remind them, thus far has the Lord helped us. and help them to put their trust in God too. And then finally, my third point, defeat can be turned to victory. Finally, Ebenezer reminds us that there is nothing that is impossible for God. He's the one who is able to turn defeat into victory. And whatever we're facing at the moment, wherever we're facing lack, wherever we're facing loss at the moment, our God is able to act. He's able to intervene. He's able to take those places of defeat in our own lives and turn them into places of victory. So let's put our trust in him, because he alone is the one who can bring the breakthroughs that so many of us are praying for. He alone is the only one who can bring those breakthroughs that so many of us need and are longing for in our lives. So as we trust in him, as we remind ourselves of all that God has done for us in the past, as we trust him for the future, may in our prayers we be seeing those breakthroughs that we're longing for, not just for us and the people that we're praying for, but also for our nation, that we may see an end to this outbreak and this pandemic, but also that God may send a revival in this nation. May God bless you. Take care and see you soon.